All right, the final thing up in today's relatively short podcast episode is Miss Marvel episode 4. Now, if you guys have been following the channel, you guys know I have absolutely loved Miss Marvel episodes 1 through 3. I think that this is the strongest the MCU has been with their Disney Plus show through the first half. Did I like episode 4? I think the answer is yes. Did I love episode 4? No. I think this is by far the weakest episode of Miss Marvel, and I'll talk about why. There's a lot here that works. There's a lot that doesn't for me. And I think the strengths continue to be strengths, but I think that, inserting some separate things and going into separate subplots and plot lines, I think kind of bogged the show down a little bit. And to say that, I'm not worried about the show, but it does dishearten me a little bit because we have seen this before, right? Where have we seen this before? Where the MCU puts out a Disney Plus show that starts out tremendously, the first 2 episodes, maybe even 3, stretching it, Moon Knight maybe, and then just sputters towards the end. Now, I'm not saying that it's the same with Miss Marvel. In fact, I think that, Miss Marvel has really had unequivocally the strongest opening of any MCU show thus far, but kind of seeing why I didn't like episode 4 and trying to dissect the reasons as to why kind of does worry me a little bit about the ending of the show. And I'll tell you why, actually. I'll start off with this, because you see the picture of her, and she's going back to Pakistan. Now, everything about her going back to Pakistan and the culture and just the immense love and care that I continue to rave about in the first 3 episodes and continue to do so in the 4th episode when they actually go to Pakistan is beautiful. Everything about it is beautiful. The relationship between her and her mother and her mother and her grandmother and her and her grandmother is wonderful. Her cousins and going into the market stall and even the little funny joke about the jeans and not being able to go into the restaurant. Like, everything is just such beautiful work here. However, I don't have a problem with anything that happened necessarily about them going to Pakistan. I have a problem with it being inserted in this part of the show because, to me, at least in season 1, right, what works about the show in season 1 thus far, if they're going to do a season 2, I don't know, is really her kind of more grounded roots, right? New Jersey and really Bruno and Nakia, right? I think the Bruno and Nakia and being in high school, because one of the things that I was thinking about throughout this episode was, isn't she supposed to be at school right now? Like, I mean, you could have inserted a line of dialogue, and I could have missed something entirely. This could have been a weekend. This could have been a break. I could have missed something entirely, so forgive me if I have. But something that I was just thinking about throughout this entire episode was she's supposed to be at school, right? Like, you just kind of take off and, if you're in high school, like, if you remember being in high school, you have things to do. I mean, it's not that easy to take off from class and not be noticed, unlike in, college, let's say. And I mean, it's a minor nitpick, but it's something that it kind of made me go, oh, okay. Like, for the first time, the show kind of slipped a little bit. And again, if there is a line of dialogue anywhere that points to the fact that she has a reason to not be in school right now, please let me know. I would love to hear it. But yeah, like I said, the strengths of the show really rely on, or really are in the more grounded aspects of the Muslim Pakistani culture and tradition in New Jersey, in the United States. And I think that going to Pakistan was inevitable, and I think a very wise thing to do, and I think that it worked out beautifully in here. But I think that it would have been best suited for something like a season 2, because kind of jumping abruptly from episode 3 to episode 4, going from the United States, going from New Jersey to Pakistan, was a little bit, I'm going to be honest, it kind of took me out of the show a little bit because it broke away from the things that were, some of the things that were working so well in episodes 1 through 3. Her relationship with Bruno, her relationship with Nakia, her relationships in high school, her just wanting to go to AvengerCon. This kind of feels like it's taking it to the next level a little bit too quickly. Whereas a show like Moon Knight, I can kind of buy a little bit more when they go to Egypt because it kind of makes sense, right? Like, that's the whole point of the show, is going to Egypt. The point of this obviously was to go to find her grandmother and talk about the train, which I think is cool. Again, I just think that it jumped it a little bit too quickly. And speaking of too quickly, we can talk about I watched it late at night. Forgive me, I don't remember this character's name or this character's name, which I think might be part of the problem. Because this whole thing with the red daggers was so quick. Now, we talk about in Doctor Strange, a lot of people talk about how it was too sudden, right? Like how, you don't really get a sense of the passage of time in Doctor Strange because how long is he training at Kamar-Taj, right? You want to talk about quick. I mean, she's training with her powers, and they're explaining all this stuff to her, and she's just accepting them, and she's being like, oh, yeah, I'll go along with you guys who could potentially kill me, and all that sort of stuff, in the span of 5 minutes of screen time. That's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I didn't have a problem necessarily with anything like either of, this actor or this actor. I think they did a good job. They did a fine job. But again, I hesitate because it just moved so incredibly quickly through their importance into the story and really, I mean, like now this character is supposedly dead, I guess, and we're supposed to care because why? I don't understand. Again, this whole idea of going back to Pakistan, it should have been expanded upon more. It should have been saved more. Like, I feel like this entire episode could have been split into 2 separate 45-minute length episodes at least. And one dealing with her coming to Pakistan and her grandmother and the train and the partition, and then one maybe training with the red daggers and all that sort of stuff. Like, it feels, again, just too rushed. Like, she goes to the train station. Everything up to the train station, by the way, I think it was great. I was loving the show. I love the vibe of the show. It's very much, like, again, still sitcom-y, but still wonderful and Marvel-y. And but when she gets to the train station, it just delves a little too far into Marvel-y when she starts quipping. And I feel like the dialogue, which had been so Kamala focused, humorous, but Kamala humorous, just turned into MCU quip factory on the train station when she's fighting this guy, and then they just become friends, and they he takes her to the red daggers, and all of a sudden she's like, okay, now I know everything about the jinn. Like, I am a jinn, but these clandestines, they want my bracelet, because my bangle, because they want to go home, and there's something about the border of realities, collapsing. Again, I did like the fact that they're alluding to the fact that there are many different dimensions. You have the duad, and you have the ancestral plane, and obviously the multiverse and stuff. So, I mean, if they can find a way to tie it all together, that would be nice. But again, I found it hard to care about any of this stuff happening because it was just too sudden. I only cared because of Kamala. I think the action was cool. I think the CGI could have been a little bit better with the glowing hands and stuff, but it's not a big deal. It doesn't bother me that much. But yeah, and then there's a big chase in the middle. And like this episode felt the most MCU out of the first 4. Which is not a bad thing. But I think that, having a show as unique as and we see the mask here, which I think is cool. But having a show that is so unique thus far through the first 3 episodes, and then just kind of having it, and it's weird because you're in a different, place, different culture altogether in Pakistan, and it should be the most unique, but in fact it feels the most MCU generic, which is so strange. It is so strange to me that is the case, and here we have her using her powers, which I think, again, looks better. It looks cool. Yeah, I think the CGI could be done a little bit better, but yeah, and then obviously the clandestines break out of the DODC, which is a really dumb sequence, honestly. It just wasn't quite believable to me. They're just kind of in chains, and then they're not, and I don't know. It didn't feel as authentic to me. And yeah, I just, it's hard, right? It's hard to balance those things together, right? Realism and also just the MCU, what the MCU is going to be. But this episode definitely felt the weakest to me. I'm not going to lie. Now, again, it might not be a sign of things to come. It might be, in which case I'm going to be very bummed. Again, this show still to me is easily the second best, even if the next 2 episodes are this level of competency. If they're lower, we're going to have to rethink that, obviously. But I think that this is easily the second. After this episode, I think it's the second best. It was, I think, even better than WandaVision through the first half. Through the first 2/3 now, I think that this is probably the second best. But if it finishes strong, it'll definitely leapfrog WandaVision for sure. Which is no small feat, by the way. It's in my top 10 of the MCU. So there's that. But yeah, I mean, and then it's really cool that she's at the train station during the partition. That's a really moving and stunning image at the end, when the Bengal gets hit by that energy or whatever. And yeah, I don't have a lot to talk about with this episode, to be quite honest, because I don't think a lot happens. I think it's a lot about self-exploration, training, and exploring the different culture, which I think, again, is great. I just feel like, the whole going out of the United States should have waited for maybe a later season or a later episode even. And B, I think that this episode in particular should have been split into two. I think it just felt a little bit rushed. And yeah. But again, all that to say is that all the things that I loved about the first three episodes that carried over into the fourth episode, things like obviously Aman Vellani as Kamala Khan, wonderful as always. The exploration of the family dynamics, the conversation between the mother and the grandmother was great. It was moving. It was touching. I think that the character relationships are working so incredibly well, which I'm so happy about. And yeah, I think that it still made for an enjoyable episode. So at the end of the day, while I didn't love this episode, I can't say that I disliked it, and I'm not particularly worried about this series, but I am a little bit more concerned after this episode. But yeah, let me know what you guys thought about Ms. Marvel episode 4 in the comments down below.